just when you thought that the only things you had to worry about this upcoming summer were crippling inflation, an open southern border, and whether or not we were going to kick off World War III, well, the CDC just threw a wrench into your peaceful plans. That's because they just announced a new COVID variant which is spreading throughout the US, and it carries with it some unusual symptoms that were not seen in other variants. And strangely enough, the rise of this new variant, well, it coincides perfectly with the WHO's new plan to implement a centralized global passport scheme, basically the global version of what the European Union enacted a few years ago. And of course, it's all being done in the name of keeping you and I safe. However, in order to explain what's really happening here, let me back up for a quick moment and set the stage for you properly. To start with, this right here is a close-up of SARS-CoV-2, the virus which causes COVID-19. And as you're likely well aware, there's been a debate raging across the entire world about whether the original virus just naturally manifested in the world or it leaked out of a lab in Wuhan, China. However, let's set that debate aside for now, because regardless of how it came into existence, this virus, after emerging in the city of Wuhan, it has been circling the globe for the past 3.5 years now, and in that process of circumnavigation, it's been mutating over and over and over again. And each new mutation of the virus has been given a different name according to the Greek alphabet. And so it started with the original Wuhan strain, which is called the alpha strain, and then it mutated along various branching pathways into the beta strain, the gamma strain, the delta strain, and then later the epsilon strain, the zeta strain, the eta strain, the theta strain, the iota strain, the kappa strain, the lambda strain, as well as the mu strain. Then the WHO, which is the organization creating these new variant names, they skipped the Greek letter nu because it sounded too much like the word new, and they argued that people might get confused that this is just a new variant. Then they also skipped the Greek letter she, spelled XI, in order to not offend anyone who happens to be named she. And so then the next variant became the Omicron variant, because that is the next Greek letter after she. Now, the Omicron variant has a unique characteristic, which is that while it was much more infectious than the original virus, it was also, at the very same time, significantly less severe in terms of the actual effects on the human body. Meaning that the Omicron strain was able to infect a lot more people more easily, but the symptoms were generally milder, which was exactly why everyone's favorite scientist, Mr. Bill Gates, he publicly referred to Omicron as an effective type of vaccine.
Well, sadly, the virus itself, particularly the variant called Omicron, is a type of vaccine. That is, it creates both B-cell and T-cell immunity, and it's done a better job of getting out to the world population than we have with vaccines.
Regardless, the virus did not just stop mutating with the Omicron variant. Here's a simplified visual of how the evolution continued. The Omicron strain mutated into Omicron BA2, BA5, BA2.75, BQ1.1, and then into the XBB strain. The XBB strain then continued mutating into XBB1.5, and then more recently XBB1.16, which is the strain that's codenamed, for some reason, Arcturus. For your reference, by the way, the name Arcturus refers to one of the 5 brightest stars in the night sky. Now, exactly why that name was chosen is not clear, but it was. And this Arcturus strain of the virus is spreading fast, given the fact that, according to the latest numbers from the CDC, it now represents 20% of all new COVID cases in the US, with the FDA pointing out in their own statement that, quote, the current trajectory of virus evolution suggests that Arcturus could be the dominant strain by fall of 2023. Now, in terms of what makes this strain different, there are several things, including its infectiousness, its ability to evade immune response, as well as its unique symptoms. And in terms of infectiousness, well, Dr. Sean Lin, he's an American virology expert, formerly with the US Army, and he said that, quote, according to laboratory studies, Arcturus had an additional mutation in the spike protein, which was more contagious. He added that Arcturus was 36 times more contagious than B11, which was the early Omicron strain. And so, if you think about it, if Omicron was already significantly more contagious than the original virus, and this new strain is now 36 times more contagious than that, well, that's a lot. But the upside is that despite its increase in infectiousness, in terms of the severity, it's remained static, with many of the symptoms being the same as before. Things like fever, sore throat, runny nose, body aches, diarrhea, fatigue, and shortness of breath. These were both the symptoms of Omicron as well as the symptoms of the common cold. However, Arcturus, it appears to add one new item to that list, which is conjunctivitis, otherwise known as pink eye. This is the new addition to the symptom list. So whereas before the symptoms were almost completely identical to the common cold, there's now a new unique symptom in the form of itchy eyes that also have sticky discharges coming from them. Furthermore, in terms of the ability of this new strain to spread, well, there was a study that was recently published in the Lancet Medical Journal. It was done by researchers over in Japan, and their study found that XBB 1.16, which is the Arcturus strain, demonstrates a greater growth advantage in the human population than XBB1 and XBB 1.5, which are the previous strains. However, similar to XBB1 and XBB 1.5, XBB 1.16 exhibits significant immune evasion capabilities. Furthermore, the researchers also discovered that Arcturus had potent resistance to various new COVID-19 antibodies. But have no fear, because late last week, the FDA made an announcement urging the vaccine manufacturers to go ahead and make a new vaccine formulation specifically targeting the Arcturus variant. Here was part of the statement, again, from the FDA, quote, "Based on the totality of the evidence, the FDA has advised manufacturers who will be updating their COVID-19 vaccines that they should develop vaccines with a monovalent Arcturus composition." And wouldn't you know it, late last week, Moderna came to the FDA with a new formulation, seeking official approval. Here's what the CEO of Moderna said in a statement alongside this request to the FDA. Quote, "We have been working diligently for months to build ample supply, with doses ready to ship in time for the fall vaccination season in the Northern Hemisphere." Although here, I think it's really worth pausing for a quick moment and taking in the situation just for a moment. Because if you remember back to a few years ago, during the very height of the COVID craze, there were people who were suggesting that it would never end with 2 shots, and that very likely COVID would become something like a seasonal virus, much like the flu. Now, at the time, the people who said those things were marginalized and labeled as conspiracy theorists. Back then, if you dared to say that COVID was just like the flu, which mutated every single year, and therefore the old vaccines wouldn't work because they were always trying to play catch-up, you would be censored for spreading dis or misinformation. And yet now, take a look at a totally mainstream news segment discussing the situation with Arcturus.
This is kind of a big lesson for epidemiology right now in saying that as long as we let viruses replicate, they may continue to mutate, which is why they have to be monitored, and why on about April 17th, the World Health Organization changed the designation to variant of interest, because these changes in XBB.1.6 that may allow it to grow faster. But that's 100% what it's all about, is just keeping an eye on these variants, not saying there's a cause for panic, but kind of giving people guidance of what they should expect.
Regardless, that's the situation as it currently stands. The virus has mutated. It now causes, among other things, pink eye, and the vaccine manufacturers are racing to get their new formulations out to market as fast as they can. However, you might be looking at the situation and asking yourself, so what? I mean, the number of people who are actually getting booster shots in this country has fallen off a cliff compared to the number of people who got the original shots, and so who cares? Well, the WHO cares. That's because amidst the backdrop of this new variant spreading across the world, the WHO made a shocking announcement. Just a few weeks ago, they unveiled a new plan to adopt the European Union's digital vaccine passport scheme, not just in Europe, but globally.